everybody, it's Drybear. When PoE2 launched in early access, I asked my audience if they wanted more hyper-polished endgame builds or a lot of theory crafting for all the classes for early game to help get them started and get them inspired to make builds for themselves. And everyone voted for the early game, so we've been working through all the classes, making builds. We finished the Mercenary, and today we just finished the Warrior, going through all the things in the Warrior kit. So I wanted to do a review or a recap of the Warrior and how I feel about where it sits right now, at least as a class entry for Path of Exile 2. Also, time is running out to get your Temporal Lord's Portal effect. This is a free effect. You just have to watch on Twitch to unlock the free drops, twitch.tv/Drybear. And also, if you want the Chimera pet, it is ending on the 22nd. So gift 2 subs on Twitch or sub and gift 1 to get this pet unlocked in game. Now, with these exercises, what I like to do is kind of pick out all of the best mechanics in the kit and try to make as many builds that are viable and useful for early mid-game that can transition into end-game builds as well. And Warrior, just like every other class in the game, has plenty of viable builds. I was actually kind of concerned. People asked me to do Warrior next after Mercenary because people were saying that it's just impossible to level or you can't find any viable builds. There are viable builds. However, I would say Warrior probably has the hardest leveling experience out of all the classes right now. And we'll talk about why that might be and the different reasons that they can target with their fixes, and they're all buffs coming from the Warrior as well. But in general, there are definitely a lot of great builds you can run and things that you can try out if you are interested in playing a Warrior. I ended up making 4 viable leveling builds, starter builds for the Warrior, one around fire magic, fire damage, totems, slams, and using the shield as well. And keep in mind that in the next update, all shield abilities as well as slams are getting some major buffs as well. So the bottom 2 builds there, the Shield Warrior and the Slam Warrior, are both going to be even better than they were previously. And I'll leave links down below for these 4 builds. I have them built out with a build sheet that you can reference, as well as built out on a calculator website that you can use as well if you're interested in trying those. Overall, I think the class fantasy for the Warrior fits. They are kind of, their starting weapon is the mace or the two-handed mace, and a lot of their abilities do seem to fit. However, there are some glaring issues, specifically in the level range of like 14 to 30, where things get really weird for the Warrior, and also some of the damage scaling feels a little bit weak or just kind of improperly managed. And I feel like over the next few months, hopefully we're going to see the Warrior get better balance. Again, they are doing like shield updates, slam updates, and other things you can do with the Warrior to make it better. And there are plenty of Warriors that are doing well in endgame right now. So let's dive into the strengths and weaknesses of the Warrior, things that I learned and things to be aware of. I would say that right now, Warrior, like the first 3 rows of Warrior, is probably the weakest out of all the 6 classes for leveling in general. Bone Shatter is probably, bar none, the best ability you can use for leveling and for early and mid game. It scales incredibly well, but it does require you to do enough stun buildup to be able to get them to prime to stun and then cause a heavy stun, or stagger as you would call it in a like a Souls-like game, to be able to stagger them there, which can sometimes get really weird. Totems were actually surprisingly useful and actually very powerful, using Shockwave Totem and Ancestral Warrior Totem. And you can also mix in things like the Ripwire Ballista and the Artillery Ballista from the Mercenary to get even more totem value there. And I think totems are a very strong, viable build with good builds on top of that. The War Cries are also incredibly powerful, even just between Infernal Cry and Seismic Cry. You can get a crazy amount of value out of those. And I think with the Warbringer Ascendancy being able to detonate corpses and having no cooldowns on War Cries, you get a crazy amount of value from those in general. Slams are a little awkward. However, one of the things that I think is very needed right now that is changing is they are buffing Rolling Slam. It is a great ability to have on your kit and to use, but it's also incredibly risky. You take a lot of damage with it, and by the end of Act 1, the damage starts plummeting to nothing. It is very painful to use Rolling Slam without a very strong two-hander, or using Giant's Blood to use 2 different two-handers as well, which makes it kind of rough. And I think which is a big shame, and where I think some of the connotation for the Warrior comes from right now, is if you end up using Rolling Slam and you level with it, you're going to notice very quickly like how much it can actually hurt you. It's a very slow ability with lots of good AoE. If you go with the Titan Ascendancy, you can get some nice aftershock value for it as well, but it's incredibly slow. You're rolling into the enemy and you just get absolutely shredded, which makes things kind of tough for you, and the damage fall off is not great, which is kind of counterintuitive as well. I think a lot of people would pick the Warrior for being the big two-handed smash 'em up Conan the Barbarian kind of character, but a lot of the abilities that let you play that way currently are just not living up to snuff. Aside from things like I said, War Cries I think are very good, Shockwaves are very good. I think shield builds, if you build them correctly, are very good, and they're about to get even stronger as well. And, you know, of course, there's plenty of like late game slam builds. like Sunder and Supercharged are both very strong as well, and you can use Hammer of the Gods too on top of that. They're also probably one of the more gear-dependent classes in the game as well, so if you're not keeping your gear up to date, or like keeping up with your resistances, armor, and being able to keep your max life up, they get punished probably the most out of all the classes, because you do have some ways to recover HP or avoid with Monk, and obviously with Sorceress and Witch, you're going to sit back or use your minions as a guard, and then Ranger and Mercenary can keep a distance or have good CC on top of everything. So I think that's just kind of like one thing that's knocking them right now. They're also exceptionally good with breaking armor, but they really only have one primary way of breaking armor, which I think is kind of weird. They have so many ascendancies, especially for like the Warbringer ascendancy. They're able to, do I have Warbringer on this character? Yeah, so Warbringer has like armor breaking on this as well. They also have a ton of armor breaking nodes all over the place in their own area that are really good at breaking armor, and they have so many effects that are good at consuming fully broken armor, but their only mainline ability that does this by default is Armor Breaker. Now you can do Splinter as well. Splinter is a great option for breaking armor through physical damage. You obviously can do Corrosion if you add in poison damage and certain things as well, and there's ways to add to it as well, but it just feels a little bit lacking that if they're so good at breaking armor, I feel like there should be at least one other way for them to armor break, mainly because a lot of the abilities that would like to use armor, you wouldn't really want to be spamming Armor Breaker over and over and over in melee and then doing armor, like something to consume it. It just feels like it's a lot of effort, where a lot of other classes can either do on trigger or like other things like that, but then having to do armor break over and over, and then you can go and do your consumption that does it, feels a little slow and kind of, extra effort versus that. But I hopefully once we get more things added to the game, it'll start to come together a little bit better. And I think one of the main reasons why Warrior feels a little out of sorts compared to others is primarily because the other weapons and classes that the Warrior is built to lean on are not currently there. So if you go to this talent skill tree, one of the best examples of this is the Keystone Giant's Blood, which allows you to dual wield two-handed weapons, but it allows you to dual wield specifically two-handed axes, two-handed maces, and two-handed swords. And I think that's kind of what the Warrior is really meant to do, is to lean into the other class that's supposed to share this part of the tree, the Marauder, which brings in the axe abilities, and the one that's supposed to share with Mercenary, the Duelist, that will bring in swords and two-handed swords. And I feel like if they had a full list of other weapons that are very similar to them that they could pull from to get all those abilities in there, especially ones that are either strength-based or strength and dexterity-based, would be very useful. The main thing that you either pull from crossbows or quarterstaffs right now, but the main challenge with quarterstaffs for the Warrior is it's across the skill tree, which means this is strength-based and this is dexterity and intelligence-based, which means you pay a non it's a non-zero price. It's quite noticeable to go across the skill tree, because you're going to have to start building up enough dexterity intelligence, where you don't really get a lot of that in here. You can grab some from the Templar and Druid side, and you'll get some dexterity over here as well, but you will have to, if you want to play with those kind of things, get a lot of extra intelligence and extra dexterity to move to the other side as well. The other thing that strikes me about the Warrior as well is it feels like there are some things that are kind of missing from the availability that other classes would have. It's almost like the role is a little too harshly defined. And what I mean by this is that, for example, say you wanted to play a Warrior that spends a lot of mana, right? There isn't really, like most classes, like Templar and Druid, Sorceress and Witch, Monk and Shadow, even Ranger, Huntress, and even like Mercenary and Duelist have at least some access to things like being able to get mana flask charges or recover mana in different ways, get mana regeneration in large amounts. But right here in the tree, you don't really have anything that's focused primarily on mana, except for one, and that is being able to convert your mana costs into life costs. It's like the only real option you have. You can go way over into the Druid Templar tree, or try to jump over to the Witch Sorceress side and get mana regeneration, or like flasks and stuff like that, or you can cut all the way over here. Like these are really good for being able to get mana, you can get flasks and stuff, but it's just so far away that if you wanted to play a mana-focused Warrior, it feels like some of that just isn't as accessible as it probably should be. I also have another major gripe with the warrior right now is that they're very well primed for a bleed build, like being able to do bleed. There's so many things you could do, like aggravating bleeding inside of your jagged ground, getting lots of jagged ground and earthquakes. I tried so hard to get a build that works for jagged ground, earthquake, bleed, or even just bleed with aggravate. And I feel like the damage right now on bleed, because it's so limited to the hit itself and doesn't scale as well as some of the other ailments, at least in my opinion, it feels like that's a little bit lacking. So I would love to see more play around like jagged ground and getting that scaled up to match things like war cries or the late game slam builds that really scale well, or even just the totem builds that do really well as well. It just feels like a lot of the jagged ground bleed just is either too far away, like you see a lot of it's over on the mercenary duelist side, even though you have some aggravation here from the jagged, or it just isn't scaling well enough compared to some of the other things that are working well for the warrior. That being said, I think there's a lot of really fun builds. I think Supercharged Slam and Perfect Strike, like the buildup of having perfect attacks where you can hit it at the right time and it does something really cool, works really great for the warrior. It certainly doesn't fit in some things like the Trial of Sekhmet with honor damage, or even some of the high-end like tier maps that do ridiculous burst damage where if you ever stand still you kind of just die. And also, I mean, even just like there are definitely nodes in here that are like for standing still. There's ones that you get mana regeneration when you stand still. You get health regeneration when you stand still. I wonder how much they're actually going to be able to do standstill mechanics in Path of Exile 2 the way it is now. Like maybe like mid-game, but after that it starts to get really weird for standing still. But I think even just these kind of mechanics are really fun. Being able to hit a timed skill shot like this, even just like for what it does, like between the major overcharge slam here, or the supercharged slam, or the perfect strike, I think are really cool additions to the character. Another thing of worth note, if we're just kind of talking about feedback in general, is I feel like because of the way the warrior is set up in a lot of ways, I almost feel like the combo-based nature of Path of Exile 2 is a little bit in conflict with Warrior. Like, for example, things like Earth Shatter, like abilities that you have to prime and then consume, I think are fine for some other classes that have like cast on effects or trigger effects, or they generally can just be faster. But I feel like some of these things that you have to combo and then do, like with multiple stage setups, on Warrior feel a little odd just because they're so much slower, and sometimes they have to do things in melee range. So I feel like if there were going to be more of a combo-based build, I would love to see more effects, like not just cast on, like cast on Ignite, Minion Death, Shock, but I would love to see more trigger options for martial classes that can actually use these sort of things, like for attacks and like special triggers, or maybe even some auras or heralds that could really use that kind of thing. I mean, we have some things like Plague Bearer, and we have the banners and stuff like that, but I think it would be nice if we had ways to, like the spellcasters, combo and cascade and merge martial attacks together to be able to ease the burden of comboing a whole bunch of stuff over and over with some of the slower classes. Now, it may be alleviated, again, once we get Marauder and once we get Duelist. That probably will make the Warrior feel a lot more fleshed out and exciting, but I do feel like that's something that they could consider for future. I also actually really like the Ascendancies in general. I think that for Warbringer, the Jade Heritage is a really easy, fun way to add defensiveness to the warrior, and hopefully with some of the changes to Trial of Sekhmet and maybe even Trial of Chaos, that starts getting more and more interesting. Free war cries is cool, detonating corpses is cool. I think having shield options is also very cool. Breaking armor below 0 and more armor break is really great as well. So you can actually do a whole bunch of armor break builds from this with Warbringer on top of everything else. I think Titan in some cases a little bit simpler, but also just very powerful. There's some sleepers like Hulking Form, increase the small effects, so all of your small effect passives that are not notables or keystones or jewels or anything, you can make all of these 50% stronger, and I think that's going to create a lot of really cool builds that probably hasn't really been fully explored right now. You have some really cool options for like heavy stun, though I wish that the warrior, at least if your Titan ascendancy, had ways to shorten the grace period after a heavy stun. So right now in the game it works, they have basically a stun build up immunity or like resistance right after being heavy stunned, and that kind of forces you to have as much damage in that heavy stun as possible. But for like rares and uniques that are very tanky, in some cases, if you wanted to do 2 heavy stuns in a row, you're forced to dodge and dive if you're doing like a full build there. I think there is some kind of survivability aspects that are really cool, and obviously the slam build is going to get better with a new support gem coming in, and slams in general are very satisfying, though they probably need some better scaling for like mid-game, like end of normal, cruel mode, and like just before end game kind of build up. But when you get the slams right, they're also very satisfying. Overall, I think that Warrior is way better than anyone gives it credit for, and I think that if you're someone who enjoys playing Warrior or like the concept of Warrior, you should absolutely commit to it. There's a lot of really great builds. There are a couple ways to screw it up, and they definitely get punished more for making the wrong decisions or having the wrong gear than other classes, but it doesn't mean that they can't be strong. They're definitely a strong top contender for sure, and I think one of the biggest things, like I mentioned, is that once we start getting more martial weapon options for them that can scale off of, you know, stats that they can gain access to, like adding in the Marauder or adding in the Duelist, or maybe even adding in the Shadow, could be some really cool options for them, or Huntress too. There might be some Spear options that make Warrior or Marauder very strong from that standpoint, so you can definitely pick that up. And like I said, I've done 4 very good leveling builds that work well for normal and cruel that you can take to endgame and start working on for endgame. I haven't tested them for mapping, but it will get you through the first 65 levels of the game quite easily. And I think there's a lot of really cool in-depth things that you can test and theorycraft for the Warrior that makes them unique and interesting in their own right. But I definitely recognize that until we get buffs, there are some abilities that feel lackluster, and I feel like they're definitely, probably more so than any other class in the game, missing. They have some pretty big holes in their ability list, as well as their talent tree, and some of their ascendancies as well, that they could fix through future updates. But of course, let me know what you think about the Warrior down below, and yeah, let's see what happens as this game continues to grow. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.